This is Talking Drupal, a bi-weekly chat about web design and development by a group of guys with one thing in common: we love Drupal. We record this live on Wednesday afternoons in a Google Hangout. Visit us at talkingdrupal.com. This is episode 113, Wednesday, February 10th, 2016. D6 End of Life. Welcome, everyone.
Hey there.
Good afternoon.
Man, we have a full house today. This is awesome. So, joining us as usual, we have John Picozzi from OOMF. How are you today, John?
I am wonderful. And yourself?
I'm great. Glad to be here. And we also have Nick Laughlin from Enlightened Design, and he's joining us from his new house. Hey, Nick.
Good afternoon. Really looking forward to today's talk about end of life, and our guest and semi-regular ex-host, Jason. It's always good to have you back on. So looking forward to today.
Happy to be here.
That's good. And so that's Jason Palmental from.
From.
I'll let him fill in the blank. But welcome back, Jason. Good to have you here today.
Thank you. I am newly back to working on my own. So, just me.
So Jason, the Just Me, we can always find you on Twitter at jpalmental.
Yep.
And is there a website people can find you at too?
Yep. You can go to rwt.io, and that's the place where I've been posting all of the stuff about web typography and code samples and articles and talks and things like that. So I'll be adding a little bit more here and there as we go.
Great. So I know that's usually what we ask at the end of the show, but I wanted to give you a little bump at the front side too. So today's topic is Drupal 6 End of Life, which is, maybe less than 2 weeks away or somewhere around there. And to join us today, we have David Snopek. So David comes to us from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He's been doing Drupal for about 8 years and is currently a full-time Drupal consultant since 2010. If you take a look at his profile page on Drupal.org, which is dsnopek, D-S-N-O-P-E-K, it's really impressive. He's got like 2,800 commits, 50 within the last 3 months. He's the co-maintainer of 20-plus modules. He's a co-organizer of a Drupal user group in Wisconsin and Milwaukee, and he frequently attends events in the Midwest. And really the reason why he's joining us today is because he's really involved with Drupal 6 End of Life. He is a member of the security team. So in his free time, he does chase around his 1-year-old daughter, and he is learning new languages. So I'm interested to hear about the new languages. Is that verbal or programming? Welcome, David.
Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here. Yeah, it's foreign languages. So I'm sort of always learning Russian and Polish language.
Fantastic. Have you learned any New England languages like that you're hearing today, like maybe Rhode Island and New York?
No, I'm afraid I'm not fluent in those languages.
Well, we've got what? Bubbler, soda.
Yeah, we've got a bunch of those.
That's Bubbala.
Bubbala, that's right.
Bubbler.
All right, guys. So, this topic today, end of life. So, we know that Drupal 8 is out. It's been out since, November 19th, maybe, somewhere around there. And we have an announcement from Drupal, about 6 months ago that said there's an end-of-life policy. And on February 24th, 2016, so that's a few days from now, that Drupal 6 will reach end of life and will no longer be supported. So that's our topic today. So what does that mean? So I'm going to read from you what's right on Drupal.org, and that will kick off our conversation. So, number one, Drupal is no longer supported by the community at large. The community at large will no longer be creating new projects, fixing bugs in existing projects, writing documentation, etc. around Drupal 6. There will no longer be commits to Drupal 6.x on the official tree. The security team will no longer will provide support or security advisories for Drupal 6. All Drupal 6 releases on project pages will be flagged as not supported, and at some point in the future, update status may stop working for Drupal 6 sites. That's the announcement of end of life. That's the official description of it. So what do you guys think about that? Let's just start with that conversation.
Well, I think one of the things that you have to, that has to go along with that is the perspective that Drupal 6 was released in February of 2008, which is quite a long time ago. And Drupal 7 came out in January of 2011, which is now, so 5 years. And then, so 8 years ago was when Drupal 6 came out. So I think that whatever your reaction is, I think it has to be tempered by an understanding of what is a reasonable lifespan of support for a given project.
The two things that kind of concern me, things have to move on, and as far as progress goes, we can't have a bunch of people working and focusing on Drupal 6 when 7 is still very much viable and 8 is new and needs a lot of work. The two things that kind of concern me here are the security team piece of it and no longer providing security advisories for Drupal 6, and then ultimately the update status not working, because we're going to talk about this, but ultimately Drupal 6, your site will continue to work, but I feel like those are two key pieces of this that are very concerning, because security is still a big issue for a lot of people, and update status not working. I guess if there are no updates, then it's not really a relevant point, but I don't feel like the terms stop working in reference to Drupal 6 on the side of Drupal should really be in there. That's just my personal belief.
I imagine at some point Drupal needs to push people from all the releases. And this is the mechanism to do. Is out of those older versions, and just to outline some of the rough numbers, I looked this up about a week ago. So the Drupal usage right now is there's about 10,000 sites on Drupal 5, 112,000 on Drupal 6, and 1 million on Drupal 7. So that's probably 5%, maybe 5% of the sites that are out there are on Drupal 6, and we need to get off of that at some point.
So yeah, I don't disagree. I don't disagree with that, but I think I don't know. As far as open source software goes, I don't feel like there should be really a push from Drupal to say like, hey, you need to get off of 6, go to 7, go to 8. I think it should be, hey, we're not going to support it in steps 1 through 1, 2, and 4 here. They make it very clear that they're going to stop supporting it. But to say we're going to push people, away from 6 into 7, I think that's a little concerning. I think that's not the right approach.
Well, but that's what they're doing. They're just not supporting it. That's not pushing it. The pressure is coming from the need to continue to upgrade, to continue to support it, and the real reason we need to is you need to keep in mind that a lot of the security team is volunteers, and we need to make sure that the people that are adopting the newest 2 releases are secure. We can't, I don't want, there's only a limited number of people in the security team. Most of them are volunteers. I'd much rather them spending their time on 7 and 8 than 5 or 4.7. Or, should they be supporting Drupal 2? I think, go ahead, David.
Yeah, speaking with my Drupal security team hat on, those two things are really about conserving resources, right? So the Drupal security team is all volunteers. I imagine there may be some people who have some time sponsored by their employer or something like that, but it's a volunteer team with really a lot of work to do. So it's about freeing up some resources to focus now on just 7 and 8 rather than 6, 7, and 8. And the update status thing, that's actually coming from the Drupal Association. They have to pay these massive hosting bills for all of these 125,000 Drupal 6 sites requesting this XML file every day. and they'd very much like to cut down their hosting bill. And that money for the Drupal Association comes from donations, from our memberships. If you're a member of the Drupal Association, so these are open source volunteer resources, donated money that the project is trying to reclaim for future work. So it's not really about pushing people software-wise, but really just wrangling together the resources for the open source project.
Yeah, I think that's the most important piece here, is that it is a volunteer-led effort, and it's only reasonable to expect it to cover a finite amount of stuff, and the only way you get people to move to those newer versions is to take an action like this. It's why it was such a big deal when Microsoft end-of-lifed IE6 and then sunsetted other earlier versions of IE. And how long did organizations hang on to Windows XP? That was really, well, still are. It's still going. And that's a cost that the community can't afford to bear.
So, what happens when end of life happens? What is the date here? Let's see, it's 24th. So on the 25th of February, we're not going to call this the year 2000 issue here, but what happens on the 25th of February? Anything?
So a couple of things are planned. Like you mentioned earlier, that all Drupal 6 releases will be marked as unsupported on Drupal.org. So for people who have the update module enabled on their Drupal 6 site, it will suddenly start telling them that all of their modules are out of date. So people will basically just have to disable the update module. Its information will no longer be reliable or useful. And yeah, at some point the update status information could be disabled entirely, but otherwise there really won't be that much noticeable stuff. The Drupal security team, the volunteer members will no longer be working on any of the security issues that concern Drupal 6 core or contrib modules, but the Drupal 6 LTS vendors and their employees will pick up that one.
So I have a question about that. Will those security issues become more public so other people can work on them? Because I know right now the security issues are fairly private.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the security issues are kept confidential, and we don't publish information about them until we have a fix for them. And that isn't going to change. So basically the way that users would report security issues is going to remain the same. Like if you go to a project page on Drupal.org, there's the link for reporting a security issue. So they'll still go in that way to the security.drupal.org tracker, except the security team, when they see any of those issues come in, they will just forward them off to the Drupal 6 LTS vendors. So no volunteer time will be spent on it.
So you've already mentioned LTS a couple of times. Let's describe what that is. So Drupal has Drupal Association, I'm guessing, has organized this group of vendors called LTS, which is long-term support vendors. Mm-hmm. And I see 3 on the list right now. There could be more that aren't officially published, but these are vendors that will provide long-term support. That's what LTS is for Drupal 6.
Yeah, so those 3 vendors are the official Drupal 6 long-term support vendors. There aren't any others that are that were officially vetted by the Drupal security team and went through that application process. It's possible that there will be other vendors who aren't on that list who offer Drupal 6 long-term support sort of unofficially. And what that means to be one of the official Drupal 6 long-term support vendors is that we get access to some of this confidential information on security.drupal.org. So if there's a security issue reported for the Drupal 7 version of a module or Drupal 7 core, that it turns out, or actually, I'll just stop there. So if there's a security issue that's reported for Drupal 7, they will forward that to the Drupal 6 LTS vendors to say, hey guys, check out if this also affects Drupal 6. And then the Drupal 6 LTS vendors will say, okay, yes or no. If it does, then they will work on the Drupal 6 fix. But the idea is that the Drupal security team will not be the one making that determination, so it's not using any of the security team resources. But yeah, so the trade-off is basically to be on that list, you get access to this confidential information, but you have to agree to publish all of the patches that you create publicly. And those are going to be published on the D6 LTS project on Drupal.org.
And are these core specific security issues, or are they related to any modules?
So definitely core, and then it's whichever contrib modules the official Drupal 6 LTS vendors choose to support. In our case, in the case of MyDropWizard, that's any of the contrib modules used by our customers. And so then each of the vendors is basically providing a list of these modules to the Drupal security team, and that's what they'll use to decide which issues they send off to the Drupal 6 LTS vendors.
What's the timeline for the LTS vendors? I mean, are they planning on doing this ad infinitum, or however you say that, or 6 years, 2 years, a month? Has there been any discussion around that?
So it's up to however long the vendors themselves want to continue doing support. In our case, in the case of MyDropWizard, we've committed to doing support at least until February 24th, 2017, so 1 year. However, we're going to reevaluate that at the end of this year. So, ideally, people would upgrade from Drupal 6 directly to Drupal 8, because then you have, the longer lifetime of that project. You won't be, 4 years from now being forced into another of the same situation. However, Drupal 8 isn't necessarily ready for everyone. There's still loads of contrib modules that haven't been ported. So we're going to kind of take a look at the situation at the end of 2016. And if it seems like there's still a compelling reason to keep doing Drupal 6 LTS, like people really haven't had that chance to upgrade to Drupal 8, we might extend it another year, and we'll make an announcement about that at the end of this year. I really don't know what Tag 1 and Acquia are planning on doing. I guess we could try and search for their marketing materials and see what they've promised, but that's what we're doing.
So David, you've touched on a few questions that I have. One is the three companies, because we haven't said them officially, you just mentioned, was Tag 1, Acquia, and MyDropWizard. Is MyDropWizard your company?
Yeah, so
okay.
I've been doing Drupal consulting for many years, and saw this need for maintenance and support. It seems like Drupal's done amazing at having these project-based companies for building sites and that sort of thing, but hasn't done quite as well with providing ongoing support to customers. So myself and my business partner, who's also run a successful Drupal consulting company for a crazy long time, like 15 years or something like that, like the entire time Drupal's been around, came together and created this new company, MyDropWizard, which does only maintenance and support. So we do maintenance and support of Drupal 7 and 8 sites, and then also recently just started doing the Drupal 6 LTS stuff too.
So it doesn't sound like we'll call the LTS companies, the three of you, are collaborating right now in terms of working together to address the security issues. So as they come in, will you be working on them independently, or are you going to be collaborating in some way to get these issues solved? And the reason I ask that is because I imagine the security team, I don't know how big it is today, but I imagine it's more than the number of people that are doing this LTS program. And does it even seem reasonable that the LTS team, either individual companies or together, could address the security issues moving forward with the number of resources that they have?
Yeah, so I have a whole bunch of responses. So first of all, the plan is for us to collaborate. Obviously, it hasn't started yet. We've had a couple of meetings with the representatives from the different vendors. I mean, it'll be interesting to see. So like D6 core stuff, I imagine everyone will be interested in. Since we will all have different lists of supported contrib modules, there might be like one that only we care about, and then the other companies don't, so they might not collaborate. We'll have to see exactly how that's going to work out. But the goal is for us to collaborate. Something I didn't mention earlier, that there will be no more commits to Drupal 6 on Drupal.org, no more releases from there, but we've discussed doing releases of PressFlow 6 so that we could still make Drupal core releases, and that's something that the three of us would have to coordinate on. So the second part of your question, which I'm trying to remember now, what was the second part of your question?
I have no idea.
So it was, would we collaborate?
Yeah.
Well, then, I can rephrase part of that question, I think. And what percentage of the time for the security team right now is kind of spent on Drupal 6 stuff? So like how many resources are being freed up, so to speak, by end of life? Because it's only about 10% of what Drupal 7 is right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was the second part of the question. That was about the resources to devote to Drupal 6 work. So I'd say with the security team currently, the Drupal 6 stuff is kind of just like this anchor weight on any D7 issue that comes up. So a lot of D7 security issues also affect Drupal 6, and Drupal 7 is much easier to maintain. There's simple tests for everything. So you make a change, you have more confidence whether it's going to break anything or not. So the D6 stuff really just slows down security work on Drupal 7. To the other question about, will we have enough time to actually address the security needs of Drupal 6 with just these 3 vendors? An important part of our offer, it isn't just, delivering these patches, which actually the patch files are going to be posted publicly anyway because of the agreement that we have with the security team, but also to help remediate if your site does get hacked. So, going forward, there's going to be way fewer people looking at the Drupal 6 code, way fewer people reporting security issues in it, and Drupal 6 is going to remain this super tempting target for hackers, right? Because there's still the 125,000 sites on it. So I'm willing to bet that there will be at least 1 or 2 vulnerabilities discovered in Drupal 6 that are exploited before patches are created. So that's why a super important part of our offer is that not only will we update your sites and get these patches out and work on them, but if your site is hacked and we don't have a patch in advance, we'll help remediate, restore your site from backups, and then figure out how the attackers got in and fixed the issue.
Okay,
so,
and to clarify, is that your offer or is that kind of the LTS team offer?
So that's our offer with My Drop Wizard.
Okay.
I don't know exactly what the other vendors are doing. I guess we'd have to, again, Google for their marketing materials and see what they're offering.
Well, it's interesting you say that, David, because one of the reasons I reached out to you when we were researching the show last week is I looked at the 3 vendors, and you were the only vendor that provided any details on your website about what the cost would be and the services you offer. So the other 2 vendors, I think one of them didn't have anything, and the other one had a form to fill out, which we know where that leads to. Especially with large vendors, when you get in some sort of queue and you may get a call back or not. So, I immediately sent you an email and, heard back from you in probably 3 hours about the questions that I had. So if you could briefly go through, what your service is that you're offering for D6 customers would be helpful.
Sure, yeah. So, we do support maintenance, not just the D6 LTS stuff, which includes like routine maintenance. Something on your site used to work last week, doesn't work this week. We'll dig in and help debug that. Answer any sort of support questions, and with our highest tier offering, we'll even help work on custom code that you might be using. So the offer is super similar for Drupal 6. There's only a couple of different changes there. On the lowest of the low end, our lowest tier offering, we're just doing updates for security patches, fixing critical bugs, which we define as things that break one of the critical use cases that we identify when we onboard customers. We say like these 3 to 5 things on your site must always work, like things that visitors or users of the site must be able to do. And if one of those breaks, it's a critical bug, and we'll help you fix it. And then remediation if your site gets hacked. So that's the low end, the lowest tier of the Drupal 6 LTS offering, and then as it goes up, we add more of those sort of support and maintenance stuff that we do normally for Drupal 6 and 7, or Drupal 7 and 8 sites.
So there's a couple of caveats there, right? So your website, as of last week said the basic service was $125 a month. Are there any conditions on the size of the site, the amount of traffic, or anything like that?
So we do a site audit. When we're first talking with customers to make sure that they're on a plan that will actually provide them with the services they need. So there isn't really like a hard cutoff, like if you have a site that's over a certain size and complexity, like, we wouldn't be willing to do that on one of the tiers, but we would definitely be able to tell you that you won't necessarily get the value that your site needs on a lower tier plan. So we do look at the individual sites and try to make sure that we're providing some value to the customer.
And it looks like you have some hosting requirements. It's either on Pantheon or on your hosting platform, right?
Yeah, so that's really a cost control thing for us for the lowest tier. We really want to have a cheap plan that we can offer to people that would appeal to a broader audience. I think that's one of the things that makes us different than the other two vendors, that they kind of deal more in the enterprise space and we're dealing more in the sort of mid to low end space. But in order to do that, we really can't deal with, $5 a month HostGator and like a whole plethora of crazy hosting situations. So in order to just sort of standardize and get our costs down so that we can offer something that cheap, there are hosting requirements in the lowest tier. But for any of the higher tiers, we'll work with whatever hosting the customer has.
I think that's perfectly reasonable.
So to set the scenario, someone has a D6 site today. They know they're not going to be off this thing in the next 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
They go to one of the LTS vendors. Let's just, for this conversation, talk about it's you. How does that process work for them? They engage with you, and what happens at that point?
Yeah, so our process is usually we have a call, then we do the site audit to get an idea of what's on the site. A lot of times, customers don't even know what's there, right? They don't know if it's a relatively standard Drupal site built on contrib modules, or the person who built it for them made like 20 custom modules and it's doing all these crazy things. So we get in there and look at kind of what we're dealing with and figure out what it would take to support them. Then we get them onto whichever plan makes sense for them. There's an onboarding process, like I said, we identify a set of critical use cases. We use those to do some amount of testing when we're deploying updates. With any of our plans, if we make an update to your site and we break stuff, we will fix it. But as a sort of gut check to make sure that we're not breaking something super important when we make an update, we have those critical use cases. We also automate those in cases where it's possible. We turn them into BHAT test cases and run them daily so we can sort of monitor if the site's still working. But then going forward, when patches come out, we will deploy them to our customer sites as quickly as possible. And if we find that the site has been hacked, we will remediate. We have a bunch of standard tools that help us do our support maintenance. So we have like a daily job that takes the customer's site code and puts it in our Git repo so that we can do all of our work in Git and then just deploy it out regardless of whatever crazy system the customer might be using, or our tools can be integrated into their workflow if they have something sophisticated going on. We also retain our own backups so that if they are hacked, we can do all of the stuff necessary to remediate right away. They might have their own backups on their hosting company or whatever that need to be requested, but like to remediate, we need a backup of the compromised site. We need the last good backup. We need to be able to quickly take the site offline and restore from backup. So we just get all of that stuff together so that we can take action right away.
So just out of curiosity, I mean, this all sounds great. I'm just curious if support for Drupal 6 is waning and updates to Drupal 6 modules is waning. What's your monthly update plan look like? Any given month there could be no updates to Drupal 6 modules. There could be no bugs found. What's the approach in months like that, or what's the scenario for updating that in that?
So I definitely think that could be true as far as security updates. I could see a month go by where there's potentially no security things for a given site. But with our not just the lowest tier that does only security stuff, we do normal bug fix things. So like we have patches to CCK and file field that we use to fix legitimate bugs in them, and some of those come from customer requests. These are people who have the higher plans where we do deal with that kind of routine support maintenance, but there's definitely value to our service even if there are no security updates.
Sure. So it's are you doing feature enhancements as well, or is it just bug hunting and that sort of thing?
Primarily just bug hunting. With the enterprise plan where we do custom developments, I mean, we could maybe be roped into very, very small features, but really the idea of what we offer and what we do is just support and maintenance.
That's very different than most other offerings. Certainly fascinating to learn. One of the questions that I had is actually around, you had mentioned your lower plans, you kind of locked down the hosting, which makes perfect sense, but on your higher plans, you'll kind of work with whatever hosting environment they have. One of the main questions I have around Drupal 6 is how you'll deal with things like PHP, because Drupal 6 is on a very, very old version of PHP, and it's just getting older. How do you deal with making sure that their infrastructure is secure or not a point of origin or something?
Yes, that's a really important issue. So Drupal 5.2, which I think is like the official Drupal 6 supported version, was end-of-lifed in like 2011. And there's loads of known security vulnerabilities in it. I would definitely never recommend anyone stick with 5.2. 5.3 is a little better. And definitely like PressFlow, the Drupal 6 fork PressFlow will work with, I think, up to 5.5. There's contrib modules that have problems with 5.5 and the other newer versions, but usually you can go down to 5.3 and still be okay. And we work, with Pantheon. We also work with Omega 8CC, and we talked to both of them, and they promised to continue supporting PHP 5.3 at least through when we're doing our current offer through February 24th, 2017. So we're confident in those hosting providers for this period of the Drupal 6 LTS. If we end up extending it another year, we may have to talk to them again and figure out what's going to happen there. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely been cases in the past where there were Drupal core vulnerabilities that only affected Drupal if you were using certain versions of PHP. And usually that means an older version, right? So definitely being on the newest version of PHP that your website can support is a great thing, and everyone should aspire to do that. And we will also, depending on the plan or whatever, try and help our customers accomplish that, to move to a newer version of PHP.
Which also means sort of move to a newer version of Drupal. I mean, people on Drupal 6, it is time to get off, right? I mean, what you're providing as a service is sort of a stopgap for the time period that people may need to get off of Drupal 6. But really the time has come, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who are very upset about the Drupal 6 end of life, and I totally understand where they're coming from. But on another side, they have had longer than ever to do the upgrade, right? This is, Drupal 8 was the longest development cycle yet, which means, people have so much time to do the upgrade. In the real world, there's other priorities that are more important in the website. If you're an organization that does lots and lots of things, the website may only represent, a small bit of that. So, we also will try and help people figure out their upgrade plans, whether that's just like in a sort of consultative advice sort of way, like we can look at someone's site and say, you're a good candidate to go all the way to Drupal 8 due to the simplicity of your site, or maybe, if you need to upgrade super soon, go to Drupal 7. Or maybe that's connecting them with some of the vendors that we know that do those types of upgrades, or in very rare cases we might be able to help do the actual upgrade. But like I said, we're a support and maintenance company, so project work isn't really our thing.
So something that, and in talking about moving to Drupal 7 or Drupal 8, something that came up when we were planning for the show or discussing our approach to the show, and something I'd like to get your thoughts on, is kind of the repetitive cycle that somebody could be in. So, they're at Drupal 6. Drupal 6 is end of life. Maybe their site has really specific functionality that Drupal 8 doesn't fit, right? So they have to go to Drupal 7. They go to Drupal 7. Well, when Drupal 9 comes out, they're going to be in the same boat that they're in now with Drupal 6. So it almost puts them into that kind of repetitive cycle of, I'm going to need to upgrade my site. I just got, 8 years of Drupal 6, and now I have to upgrade my site every, what's the release cycle, Nick? I'm sure he can tell me off the top of his head.
Well, it's changing now, but I think its aim is 2 years or something like that. 3 years.
So now you're saying, okay, if I get into this kind of workflow, I have to upgrade or rebuild my site every 2 years. It's a real head scratcher, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the next end of life, the Drupal 7 end of life, is going to be even more painful than this one, unfortunately. The plan from the Drupal core team is that Drupal 9 will be very similar to Drupal 8 and may in fact be compatible with it. So that's really exciting. But the people who are on Drupal 7, that doesn't help them at all. So if possible, people should try to get to Drupal 8, and hopefully we'll have a much easier upgrade experience, 8 to 9, because, yeah, like you're saying, being on Drupal 7 a couple of years from now could put people in the same situation again.
So the goal there is an upgrade path eventually, at some point. Maybe it's 9, maybe it's 10, but somewhere in there, there's an upgrade path.
Well,
Since
go ahead.
Okay, so no one knows exactly what's going to happen, but what the core committers are talking about is having the last version of Drupal 8 include all of the new stuff that is in Drupal 9, and then Drupal 9 will be just removing deprecated code. So like it'll mean that we'll be able to port all of the contrib modules and everything super, super fast. And whether or not you still have to do like an upgrade module style thing to move your content over, we should be looking hopefully at a much easier experience then.
Well, that was the whole goal behind pulling migration in a more central way. And I think that that's a really sound practice because it smooths the path from one version of Drupal to the next by allowing a transfer of content rather than an upgrade. And I think that generally tends to give you a cleaner starting point. And it also makes it a lot easier to move into Drupal from any other system. So I think that was really a sound decision and I think a good path moving forward. And to be perfectly honest, I know that I've only seen a small selection of the Drupal sites that are out there, but I've gone through the upgrade process for a number of them from 5 to 6 and 6 to 7, and in general, a single version upgrade, unless it's entirely custom code, it's usually not that terrible an ordeal. I mean, it's not nothing, but I think that businesses have to be realistic in their infrastructure cost, and a website is part of their business infrastructure. So I recognize that it's not nothing, but I think it's an entirely reasonable thing for a company to expect that every 4 years or so they need to make an investment in this asset that they've developed that is a critical part of the operation of their business.
Jason, yeah, I agree with that to an extent. I think based on functionality and what the site is doing, the upgrade path can be can be more or less difficult. But I do agree that companies really just need to kind of I don't want to say suck it up, but they just need to plan for this sort of thing, and it really behooves them, because when you do make an upgrade or rebuild a site, migrate content, however you do it, the site tends to get better. There are things that you've learned over the last X number of years that you're going to change or you're going to improve upon. So, you're not only spending money to get new software, but you're also spending money to build a better product.
Well, I think we were able to make responsive sites in Drupal 6, but boy, we have to really work at it. And we still had to work at it in Drupal 7, but it was a lot easier to do. And at every stage, there's so many new things in the world of the web that, in some ways, the more complicated the site is that an organization has developed, the more applications running, the more critical business functionality going on there, really the more value it's generating for that company. And to think that any asset will continue to generate that significant value without regular care and feeding is just not realistic. And any good business needs to plan for that and have an ongoing budget. So, if they've gotten by for, 6 years, 7 years now with that investment in a Drupal 6 website, then they should have been planning for this day and should be prepared for it. I mean, I don't want to go so far as to say they should suck it up. That's a little, it's a little mean, but it is realistic.
You would think Apple has prepared us all that every 2 years you just buy something new, right?
Well, I mean, the web has been full of things like that.
Right.
Usually the bill on your website's a little bit more than a new iPhone, but not by much.
So, when making a decision, and this really isn't just a migration decision, it's it's either a new website or a migration of an old website. How do we today position, and what are the things we think about when we're trying to steer a customer? Should we build this in 8 or build it in 7? Those are decisions that we're all probably struggling with right now.
Yeah, I think everyone's dealing with that problem. I was talking to some people who are responsible for Drupal shops relatively recently, and there's sort of like this valley of uncertainty that we're stuck in right now, which is really negatively impacting a number of people because of exactly that, right? Like their customers, if they hear like Drupal 7 or Drupal 8, of course they want Drupal 8. It's the newer one. So they're like, oh, when the shop tells them their site isn't quite, or that Drupal 8 isn't quite ready for their site, they're just like, oh, we'll just wait for that, no problem. And it is no problem necessarily for the customer, but for all of these Drupal shops trying to get projects and get work done, it can definitely be a problem.
Well, I think that's where a lot of people have to go through what are the core things that you've got to have in order for you to do what you consider to be, the standard components of a functioning website. And I think we've seen that in some cases it's all there, or at least it's all there in dev, maybe not in fully realized modules. But yeah, I mean, I think that we can all agree that there's at this point still some fairly significant gaps in what's available, and that's where that window comes in. How quickly does this site have to launch? Is it a 6-month project, or is it a 3-month project, or is it longer? I think complex 3-month projects that have to launch. We looked at that at the place where I used to work a couple of months ago, and we made, I think, the sensible decision to not even try. We had to make sure that this thing could launch by the end of February, and looks like it will, but we stuck with 7 instead of 8.
Yeah, and I think we're kind of starting to climb out of that valley of uncertainty, as you said, because the thing is, Drupal 8, as David said, was the longest development cycle ever, and its release, when it did kind of coalesce, was very quick. Very, very quick. It was kind of like, I feel like it was like October, like, yeah, I think we're going to release, and then 2 days later, it's like, yep, 3 weeks from now. So I think a lot of the very large Drupal shops, while they were familiar with Drupal 8, they've been working with it, they hadn't necessarily started that conversation completely with their clients. Now that it's been a full release, I know that that's been happening, and they're a lot of the driving force behind moving all those, helpful little contrib modules. They're, because we have the core, we have WYSIWYG, we have views, we have entity, we have tons of stuff that we needed. It's just a lot of the little helper modules that weren't quite as necessary in Drupal 7, but now have become really the bread and butter of Drupal haven't been moved over. And the bigger companies stepping in now with confidence, I think within the 3 to 6 months of the release, that's when those will really start launching. As those launch, those modules will be released and updated. So I think we're in a good track. I think within 6 months of its release, so another 3 months from now, most of that stuff will be ready.
Yeah, I hope so. To give like a sort of a bit of perspective on my experience with this, I've been involved in the Scotch initiative trying to port panels in the panels ecosystem to Drupal 8, and so I've been involved in it for 2 years, and other people in the initiative have been going for 3 years. So that's like 2 or 3 years attempting to port panels to Drupal 8, and we have a beta now. Like a couple of weeks ago, we did a beta, and that's awesome. But it's really non-trivial. I'm very much looking forward to this 8 to 9 that they're promising us, where we won't have to change that much. But it's not like when we ported stuff from 6 to 7.
So how do we prepare our customers? So there's a process we go through is preparing ourselves as developers and understanding the differences between 7 and 8, what we can and can't do. How should we be talking to our customers about this? And I imagine any Drupal 6 customers we probably should have been talking to them probably about 6 months ago.
I like
to give a heads up.
I like to take the fire and brimstone approach.
Which is what?
No, I'm just kidding. Scaring them is not going to do any good.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's similar to the way we've been talking about it recently on the show, in that it really depends on the project. I mean, if it's a very simple, nearly brochure-aware site, I think you're good to go. I mean, you're gonna run into a couple hiccups. You want to have a conversation where, hey, we're probably going to do this. We'll get the site up, we'll get it looking good, and then 6 months from now, we'll go through again and maybe tweak a couple things to just polish it off. The other thing is, for moderately complex sites, you just need to pad. You just need to pad the timeline, really. I mean, which obviously comes with the cost, but you just need to give yourself a longer time. So if you have a project that you could do in 4 months in Drupal 7, aside from just learning the technology, you need to give 6 months in Drupal 8, to allow for some catch up and more extra research and that kind of stuff, and make sure the client is willing to, delay that release. And you explain that trade-off, like, yes, we could launch in 4 months in Drupal 7, and then you probably have 3 more years, or we can add a couple of months to this, and you can have Drupal 8 for 5 or 6 years, with much better support in those 5 or 6 years, because Drupal 7 support is going to start tailing off, just like Drupal 6 did once more people adopt Drupal 8. So that's the conversation. The timeline is going to be a little longer, which necessarily increases the budget a little bit, but you're going to get a much longer tail on this. Which is more important, time to market or time in market?
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with that. It really depends on project. I've had instances in both camps where I've had a Drupal 6 client that we've been basically prepping and saying, hey, end of life is coming. Here's what it means. The site's not going to stop working, but you're going to get less updates, less security patches, so on and so forth. We'll still support it, but we're recommending moving to a Drupal 7 or Drupal 8. The other part of that Nick mentioned is time, and for some clients, time may not be an issue, but it may not really fix the problem. I recently did an audit on a site comparing the modules that they currently had to what was available in Drupal 8, and the decision was that, wow, there are a lot of modules here that either don't have a version, don't say anything about Drupal 8, or have a version that's in dev, which is great, but they're modules that aren't like core to this website actually working the way that it does now.
I think that's actually a very interesting point, and maybe we shouldn't go too far down this rabbit hole, but the fact is, the way that Drupal maintainership, ownership of modules works, there are tons of Drupal 6 modules that people built 6 years ago, haven't touched in 5 years, and because it was never really used in Drupal 7, might be needed in Drupal 8 for a particular project, but there's no way for you to get into that project. So then either you're stuck building from scratch or finding a way to claim ownership of a particular module. I think that will come out more and more in the coming months.
Let me actually just clarify that, because I don't think I actually did. The site that I was doing this audit on was actually a Drupal 7 site to a Drupal 8 site. So the immediate need to upgrade to Drupal 8 was definitely not there, but we were working on rebuilding the site, and we were trying to figure out if rebuilding it in Drupal 8 made sense, or if we should simply stick with Drupal 7, what we got now, and just modify the heck out of it. So, definitely do that kind of audit. Look at the modules you have installed, even on your Drupal 6 site, and just see what's available, what's out there. I do agree with Nick at the point of, if you can get into Drupal 8 and you can sacrifice some of the functionality or dumb down some of the site features for a little while, it'll probably serve you better in the long run, especially if you don't want to be in a scenario where, bless you, where you have to you have to be kind of on the upgrade treadmill, if you will.
I think
So,
there's something important. Just sorry to jump in, Steve, but I think it's really important to remember that when you do an audit like that, it's also the time to really pause and reflect a bit on why were those things in use in the first place. So there are, right off the bat, there may well be a whole bunch of modules that aren't necessary. So that thins the herd quite a bit. But we also know that there are usually 3 to 5, at least, different ways of doing any given thing. And is that thing still relevant? And if so, is there simply a different way that it could be built? If you don't need to use context, then maybe, if you're shifting to panels, like whatever it is, there are different ways to go about providing any given piece of functionality. Or it might be something that was simply there to add a library, which could be done in Drupal 8 simply by building it into the theme. So there are a bunch of different ways to manage ensuring that you get the right end result without necessarily having to match up the list of modules. I mean, I think it's the right place to start, but once you've narrowed it down to, okay, these things exist, let's look at the things that don't and see if they're actually still even necessary or the only way to do it.
so in context of preparing the customer, I think if you're going to be recommending a Drupal 8 solution, you should be coming at that project in a Drupal 8 frame of mind, not a Drupal 7. And the customer needs to be prepared that, hey, as we go through the project, we may run into things we thought we could do in wearing a Drupal 7 hat and might not be able to deliver with the Drupal 8 hat. And you can certainly find a way to resolve the problem. Change the design a little bit, change the functionality slightly, and then just put it on like a phase 2 kind of queue. We recently did a Drupal 8 project, and that's exactly how it was handled. There was a handful of things, half a dozen items that we thought we would just sort of build because that's the way we always looked at it, and then ran into some issues, and then the customer knew that up front, so the expectations were readjusted as we went along, with their understanding all along that there'd be a little bit of risk with Drupal 8, and that in the end they'd be sort of ahead of the curve a little bit, and that's really what happened. So it kind of worked out good. I think if you are upfront and clear with the customer and clear with yourself in terms of what you may and may not be able to do, you'll be okay.
That's a great approach.
Okay, so let's as we sort of wrap into our module of the week, I want to just give another minute here to see if anyone, since we had a security expert on the phone with us today, if anyone had any questions. I know, Nick, you posted something here in the notes, and if we could keep this to a quick question, but I think it'd be great to hear it.
Yeah, so I came across the security issue about a year and a half ago. And so I'd like to hear kind of from the other side. I know you guys have tons of work to do, and you do, as you said, you're all volunteers, and there's what, 40 or 50 of you?
I think less than that. I think maybe 20, 30 would be.
Oh, yeah. Wow. So you're even more overworked than I thought. But I had an experience where, I reported the issue, initially came back, could not reproduce, so I gave very explicit instructions, but also kind of built the system on a throwaway DigitalOcean server, provided links to that, found that it sat around for a few months, came back, eventually shut down the server because I was paying for it, then got an email saying could not reproduce, kind of rinsed and repeated a couple of times. I guess my question is, how can we really make that as smooth as possible? So, I mean, it wasn't the most critical. It was, kind of one of those unintentional access type issues. So not the most critical, not the most critical kind of issue, but I'm just curious, how can we make your job easier, considering you do so much?
So, yeah.
And can you look at my issue?
Sure. No. So there's a number of valid recourses if someone's not responding to your security issue. And I think even in the documentation we have somewhere, it's like ping a member of the security team. So like pinging a member of the security team is definitely a valid recourse. For whatever reason, like posting things on live sites for people to test just doesn't work well in the Drupal community. I don't know why. People really want to be able to set up something from scratch and reproduce it there. In your particular case, do you know if you were dealing with the maintainer or a security team member?
I think it was a security team member, and it was a fresh install, so it wasn't like a copy of the site having the problem. It was, here are the steps to reproduce it. Here's a site with that reproduced. This is how you can test it.
Yeah, I mean, it's really unfortunate that that came out the way it did. I mean, the security team, like on any of those issues, it's usually, the reporter, the module maintainer or core maintainers, and then like a security team person to just sort of like make sure that the process is followed, that things keep moving forward, doing some amount of validation if the issue is a real issue. Yeah, I mean, I guess in your case, I would have recommended pinging another member of the security team to look at it and to check it out. I mean, it could have just been whoever was working on it that day was having a bad day.
Could have been. So maybe we can touch base after.
Yeah,
I'd
absolutely,
really
sure.
like to see if it was a worth, because it could be just that it really isn't an issue, or maybe it's been fixed since then, because it has been a few months since I looked at it. But yeah, I was just interested to hear how we could make that process easier, because Lord knows you guys have enough work.
Yeah, my personal opinion about this isn't like official security team opinion, but my personal opinion is we need more people on the security team. So if anyone has experience, working on contrib modules in Drupal and some understanding of, the security concerns associated with like the Drupal APIs, apply for the security team, please. Pretty please.
How would someone go about doing that?
So I'll find the link later so we can get it in the notes, but there's, you send an application to security@drupal.org, and you're supposed to include a number of different things in it.
Yeah.
And then the way that looks is, the security team reviews it. Usually it's like kind of like a voting process. If 2 people plus 1 you're in. And then you get assigned a mentor, and you go through a sort of provisional membership stage where, you get onboarded and learn all of the different processes that we follow, do a couple of issues, and then eventually become a security team member. But yeah, I mean, there's loads of issues coming in. We get tons and tons of false positives. So, there's different people at different times will have a little bit of availability, and they'll try to, triage a whole bunch of those at once and see like, oh, okay, we were able to throw away these ones, so now we can have the team actually focus on working on these other ones. And unfortunately, sometimes people make the wrong decision there. I think that's probably what happened in Nick's case. But yeah, if we could get some more manpower on the team, I think that'd be fantastic.
Great. Yeah, thanks for answering that.
Code word clearance or higher is greatly appreciated as well.
All right, so let's move on to a module of the week, office hours.
Well, so the module of the week this week is office hours, and I think it's appropriate that Jason's here because he certainly had, on a project that he and I worked together on, he had to wrangle that module to get it to output the HTML in a way that was useful. If you're not, it's a module that allows you to put the hours of the office out there. It's pretty straightforward. It's got a pretty good interface. It allows you to control. For example, you can have breaks in the day. So if you're a place that closes for lunch or something, you could say, for example, we're open 8 to 11, we're closed from 11 to 1, and then open 1 to 6 or whatever. It's pretty intuitive. There is a full release for Drupal 8. However, according to the maintainer, the UI isn't complete and the JavaScript is quite broken. So any JavaScript experts are welcome to chime in and help out. But I just find it's a fairly straightforward module that solves one of those issues that on its face seems pretty easy, allowing people to enter hours. But as soon as you try to build it from scratch, it becomes a mess. It's not necessarily for the case where you're doing a site for a company like a mechanic or an auto body or something like that where they just kind of have one set of hours. It really excels when you have a system where, for example, you have a franchise and there's 300 stores and each store might control their own hours. That's a really good use case. I found it was really helpful for the city website that I worked on, where each department might have different closings depending on holidays or particular schedules or things like that. So it was useful because there's 10, 20, 30 different departments. In entering those manually or giving somebody access to change those manually would be a nightmare. And it just you can control it with it gives you a field, gives you a nice widget, and pretty straightforward. Definitely a fan.
So we used it there, And then I ended up using it with John when we were working on a website for a network of healthcare clinics, and so that was a similar situation where it was a content type for a location, and it had hours, and they needed to be able to set them all individually. So it is great for that use case, but I actually wouldn't discount it for the auto mechanic who wants to have the hours there, because it does something really interesting. It can, based on the user's time zone, tell you if it's within that time. So if you wanted to get into something that is like really location and context aware, you can do some pretty cool stuff with that, so that your site could react differently if it's open or closed based
Good
on.
point. Completely forgot about that feature where it can say if you're closed now or not.
Yeah, so like that aspect is really pretty cool. I
just picture people everywhere hiding all of their contact information if their business is closed.
Well, maybe they don't show you the secret door code. But the other thing that was that worth noting is in the project that I worked on with John, we used Display Suite and Display Suite extras with that to control the markup in a much easier fashion than what we experienced on the project that you and I worked on together, Nick. So it really did help deal with some of the issues that we were having in getting the markup and getting the front end to display things really the way we wanted to.
It also has fairly good views integration as well. So there is that piece of it too, that you can kind of put that information out in a couple of different places as opposed to just on one content type or one page.
John, were the holiday hours part of the same module, or was that something else?
Same module.
No.
Yes,
No, I think we built that as a separate set of
really?
fields.
I remember having the ability to tweak some of that stuff, but maybe that was something else on my end too.
Yeah, I don't remember. That was a useful addition, but I can't remember how we built that. I think you're right, John. I don't think it was necessary. There may be functionality for that in the office hours module, but I don't think we used it. It didn't really fit the use case very well.
All right, so check out Office Hours. Sounds like a really useful module.
Yeah, it's cool. It's a good one.
Yeah. All right, so as we wrap up today, David, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
It was great to have you on. So if people wanted to reach out to you, where could they get in touch with you after the show?
So for community Drupal stuff, I guess check out my profile on Drupal.org. I'm dsnowpeck, DSNOPEK, so that's Drupal.org/u/dsnowpeck. Then you can use the contact form to contact me there, or go check out any of my community projects or any of that stuff. For support and maintenance, go to mydropwizard.com. You can find all of our Drupal 6 long-term support information there, and there's also contact forms to get in touch with us about that.
Great. I'm going to sneak in one more quick question here. How has your response been to the long-term support for Drupal 6 been so far?
Well, it's been crazy. The closer we get to February 24th, the number of inquiries we're getting are just going up exponentially. So there's a huge amount of interest.
Excellent.
That's great. What's worth pointing out with that is the more people that are taking you up on it means the better support there will be available generally, because that means you guys actually have the time and revenue to support really tackling these problems in a fast and efficient manner. So that's really great to hear.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, Jason, thank you for joining us again this week. Good to see you. Good to see you back. How can people reach you?
You can find me at jpomentel on pretty much any social network. I'm sort of gathering my thoughts to see if I want to look for another full-time position or keep working on my own. So find me on Twitter if you're interested in talking about stuff. That'd be great. And if you want to see me in person, I'm going to be down in Atlanta in a couple weeks for the Web Afternoon Conference, giving a talk on the time when the words were your experience, and another typography talk on the history of user experience through the lens of typography. So it'll be fun.
Hey, when we were watching the Super Bowl on last Sunday, my daughter and I would have a conversation about the typography of the numbers on the uniforms. So I thought of you during that time.
I thought it was kind of funny, the commentary on switching from Roman numerals to just the number 50.
50, exactly.
Like just even that in and of itself, it was an interesting discussion.
So the household was in our house. The vote was that the Broncos numbers were better than what was the other team?
Panthers?
Panthers. The Panthers numbers. Thank you from the non-sports guy.
I didn't even watch it. The only reason why I know is because people are saying people are saying not to pull in South Carolina during the Super Bowl.
John Picozzi from Oomph. Where can people find you?
People can find me this Tuesday at Drupal PVD, which we'll be having at AS220 in Providence. I know Jason and Steve will both be giving talks, and we'll be looking forward to seeing AS220's Media Lab.
Yeah.
You can also find me on all the social networks at John Picozzi and always on at oomphinc.com.
Awesome. Thanks. How about you, Nick?
You can find me online at Nixman pretty much everywhere, and my new website, enlightendevelopment.com.
Awesome.
Awesome, and you can find me, Stephen Cross, on Twitter at Stephen Cross with a PH, and we will talk to you guys soon. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.